Ida Wood was born Ellen Walsh on March 7, 1838 in Massachusetts, to Irish immigrant parents. Today, her name is inseparable from one of the most remarkable cases of voluntary seclusion among America's wealthy, remembered as the millionaire who spent nearly a quarter century confined within hotel rooms in New York City. Ida is now a symbol of extreme privacy, paranoia, and the hidden burdens of Gilded Age wealth. But before she became a case study in isolation, she was known for her ambition, her prominent marriage to newspaper publisher Benjamin Wood, and her years as a noted socialite in the city's upper echelons. Her life's arc included modest origins, a meticulously constructed new identity, calculated entry into high society, a marriage that brought both public status and financial independence, and eventually, a relentless withdrawal from the world. The trajectory of Ida's story reveals the causes and consequences of isolation, the legal and psychological aftershocks, and the lessons drawn by future generations. Before we begin, please comment where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know that this story is being watched from all around the globe. Ellen Walsh was born in Massachusetts on March 7, 1838, to Irish immigrant parents who had arrived in the United States in the preceding decade. Her family settled in a working-class community, and the constraints of social mobility were immediately apparent in the limited opportunities available to Irish Catholic families at that time. Census records from the 1840s and 1850s indicate a stable but unremarkable existence, with her father employed in manual labor and her mother managing the household. Ellen's early years were marked by a steady pursuit of education and a growing awareness of the economic and social limitations imposed by her origins. Community registers from this period document her consistent attendance at local schools, but also reveal that by her mid-teens, Ellen had begun to distance herself from family traditions, displaying a pronounced ambition that set her apart from her siblings. As the 1850s progressed, a period characterized by expanding opportunities in the rapidly industrializing northeastern United States, Ellen initiated a personal transformation that would alter the trajectory of her life. In her late teens, she formally adopted the name Ida Mayfield, a change that allowed her to separate herself from the Walsh family and the constraints of her Irish background. This decision, as later documented in legal affidavits and correspondence, was both practical and strategic. The new identity enabled her to bypass entrenched social prejudices and present herself as someone of independent means and ambiguous, but presumably respectable ancestry. The significance of this change was not lost on contemporaries who later testified in court. Several noted her adeptness at masking her origins and navigating elite social environments. By 1856, Ida had relocated from Massachusetts to New York City, a move supported by entries in city directories and surviving travel documents. New York at that time was a magnet for ambitious individuals seeking to redefine their circumstances. The urban economy was expanding rapidly, and the city's population included a growing number of self-made men and women who leveraged appearance and connections as much as birthright. Ida's arrival in the city coincided with the rise of new social clubs, boarding houses, and venues catering to unattached women of means. She quickly established herself in a series of boarding houses located in the neighborhoods of Lower Manhattan, paying rent in advance and adopting the mannerisms and dress of the urban upper middle class. These details, attested by contemporaneous property ledgers and boarding house registers, underscore the deliberate and methodical nature of her reinvention. During the next several years, Ida invested significant effort in refining her public persona. She attended lectures, social gatherings, and charity events that were frequently noted in the society pages of local newspapers. She forged friendships with women of similar ambition, and she was known to frequent establishments patronized by young professionals and rising businessmen. Surviving correspondence and social notes reveal that Ida was regarded as intelligent, discreet, and unfailingly cautious about her origins. She never spoke of her childhood in Massachusetts and routinely presented herself as someone of Southern birth, a claim she would later amplify in dealings with prominent New Yorkers. This period of self-fashioning laid the foundation for her entry into elite circles and her eventual marriage to a man of significant social standing. The adoption of the Mayfield name was not merely cosmetic. Legal records from the 1860s indicate that she used the new identity for all formal transactions, including the leasing of property and the management of personal finances. She opened accounts at local banks under the Mayfield name and began cultivating relationships with attorneys and agents who handled her affairs without reference to her previous life. The effectiveness of this transformation is evidenced by the complete absence of any public association with the Walsh family after her arrival in New York. For the remainder of her life, no official document or legal instrument would refer to her by her birth name. Ida Mayfield's relocation to New York City in the latter half of the 1850s marked the start of a deliberate campaign to secure a place in a social order defined by wealth, ambition, and status. New York, already the largest city in the United States, was experiencing dramatic population growth, driven by waves of migration and economic expansion. The city's neighborhoods were rapidly developing, with new hotels, boarding houses, and entertainment venues catering to both established elites and aspiring newcomers. City directories from the period confirm Ida's registration at multiple addresses within Lower Manhattan, a pattern consistent with her intent to maintain privacy while maximizing social mobility. Her presence in the city coincided with a flourishing of civic institutions, literary societies, and philanthropic clubs, providing structured opportunities for social advancement. During these early years in New York, Ida pursued a strategy focused on visibility and strategic association. She attended public lectures at Cooper Union, enrolled in courses offered by private academies, and appeared regularly at charity events organized by prominent social figures. Newspaper accounts from the 1850s and early 1860s mention her name in connection with fundraisers and balls attended by business leaders and politicians. The choice of these venues was not coincidental. By participating in events where young professionals and society families mingled, Ida gained access to networks critical for upward mobility. Her ability to blend in was noted by contemporaries, several of whom later described her as reserved but remarkably well-informed, characteristics that helped establish her as a credible participant in city life. Evidence from surviving correspondence and social registers indicates that Ida's daily life was carefully managed. She was known to frequent reading rooms and restaurants that attracted artists, journalists, and financiers. At the same time, she avoided venues with reputations for scandal or ostentation. Financial records from this period document her prudent management of personal resources. She rarely extended credit and made all payments in cash, a practice that insulated her from gossip and potential creditors. This focus on discretion, paired with her disciplined public conduct, set her apart from many other women seeking advancement during the period. Ida's ability to cultivate relationships with influential men became apparent by the early 1860s. Letters preserved in later estate litigation show that she corresponded with several individuals who held positions in publishing, politics, and business. These exchanges were formal in tone and focused on opportunities for professional association or support for charitable causes. There is no evidence to suggest romantic involvement in this period. Rather, the documents reveal a strategic approach to social interaction, grounded in mutual benefit and shared ambition. It was through these connections that she was introduced to Benjamin Wood, an established newspaper publisher and political figure whose own career had brought him into contact with the city's most powerful circles. The years leading up to her introduction to Benjamin Wood were formative in defining Ida's reputation. By the mid-1860s, she was recognized as a capable, intelligent woman who maintained her independence and guarded her privacy. This reputation would be instrumental in facilitating her entry into New York's upper class, providing the social capital necessary for the next stage of her life. The patterns of discretion, association, and self-presentation that Ida developed in these years formed the basis for her later success, and were repeatedly cited in later accounts as evidence of her resourcefulness and resolve. Ida's deliberate approach to integration into New York society fundamentally altered her prospects. Her early years in the city were characterized by careful calculation and a steady accumulation of social capital, positioning her to seize new opportunities as they emerged and shaping the conditions for her future ascent through marriage and financial management. The marriage of Ida Mayfield to Benjamin Wood in the late 1860s represented a significant transition in both her personal trajectory and her status within New York society. Benjamin Wood, a well-established publisher of the New York Daily News and an influential Democratic politician, was already recognized for his role in shaping public discourse and for his active engagement in the city's political life. The official record of their marriage, confirmed by both civil documentation and later court affidavits, indicated a union that offered Ida not only social elevation, but also direct access to significant financial resources and influential networks. At the time of their marriage, Benjamin was a widower and nearly 2 decades older than Ida, with a reputation for both shrewd business acumen and unpredictable personal habits. Upon marrying Benjamin, Ida assumed responsibilities consistent with the expectations placed on the wives of prominent men in the late 19th century. She was tasked with managing the household, supervising staff, and representing the family at public functions. Surviving correspondence and household account books demonstrate that Ida played an active role in overseeing expenditures, maintaining detailed records, and enforcing financial discipline, especially as Benjamin's business ventures often involved significant risk. Her reputation for careful stewardship was supported by the regularity with which she reviewed the household's accounts and her insistence on approving large purchases. These patterns are documented in ledgers later submitted as part of estate litigation. Benjamin Wood's career was characterized by considerable volatility, with frequent involvement in gambling and speculative investments. This volatility produced periods of both windfall gains and abrupt reversals, requiring a steady and disciplined approach to financial management. Ida's presence provided a counterbalance to Benjamin's habits, and her efforts to safeguard their assets became a defining feature of the marriage. Contemporary observers noted her preference for cash reserves, her skepticism of credit arrangements, and her reluctance to trust bankers or legal advisors outside the immediate family. Her decision to limit investments to easily liquidated assets reflected an ongoing concern for security and autonomy. As the wife of a publisher, Ida was expected to attend social functions, support charitable causes, and maintain the family's public image. Surviving invitations, guest lists, and newspaper accounts document her frequent appearances at society events, where she was recognized for her discretion and reserve. She avoided controversy, declined invitations to more extravagant gatherings, and maintained a careful separation between her public and private lives. It is clear from personal letters and contemporaneous press coverage that Ida's approach to social engagement was calculated and consistent, supporting Benjamin's reputation while protecting the family from unnecessary exposure. Despite her efforts to maintain stability, the marriage was not without tension. Benjamin's gambling and occasional extramarital relationships, while never the subject of direct scandal, created ongoing challenges for Ida. Her responses were methodical rather than emotional. She increased oversight of household accounts, instituted stricter rules regarding the handling of money, and gradually assumed more direct control over major financial decisions. These actions were later cited in legal proceedings as evidence of her prudence and foresight. While Benjamin continued to pursue high-risk ventures, the day-to-day management of the household and the preservation of accumulated wealth increasingly fell to Ida. By the mid-1880s, the pattern of responsibilities within the marriage had stabilized, with Ida recognized as the de facto manager of the family's finances and social commitments. This division of labor allowed Benjamin to focus on his public career and speculative activities, while Ida maintained the structure necessary to safeguard their assets. The effectiveness of this arrangement was evident in the family's continued solvency, even during periods of economic uncertainty. The marriage to Benjamin Wood provided Ida with the institutional legitimacy and financial resources necessary to secure her position among New York's elite. Her active role in managing the household and finances set important precedents that would shape her conduct in later years, particularly after Benjamin's death. The experience gained during these years proved essential to her ability to navigate the complex legal and financial challenges that would arise in the subsequent phases of her life. After her marriage to Benjamin Wood in the late 1860s, Ida Wood experienced a period of marked social ascent within New York's elite circles. The couple's established address and Benjamin's association with the New York Daily News ensured regular invitations to the era's most significant gatherings. Society columns of the time frequently included their names among attendees at charitable galas, theater openings, and political receptions. Ida's conduct at these functions was consistently characterized by discretion and reserve. She adhered to the conventions of upper-class decorum, avoiding any public actions that might attract negative scrutiny or invite gossip. Correspondence preserved by contemporaries and later cited in legal proceedings attested to her careful management of social relationships, with each engagement chosen for its potential to enhance the family's reputation or consolidate their network of allies. The period between the late 1860s and the early 1880s saw Ida occupy a central role in maintaining the family's social obligations. She managed the logistics of entertaining coordinated household staff for formal dinners and oversaw correspondence with influential acquaintances. Archival household ledgers and personal diaries from this time record her preference for intimate gatherings over larger, more affairs. These decisions reinforce the family's image as respectable and prudent rather than flamboyant, even as other figures in the Gilded Age embraced conspicuous displays of wealth. Ida's social strategy extended to philanthropic involvement, a requirement for women of her position. She served on committees for several charitable organizations, with her name appearing in annual reports and donor rolls for hospitals, orphanages, and relief societies. These commitments were always carefully documented, with Ida ensuring that all contributions were made directly and that the family's participation was both visible and moderate. Her approach reflected an understanding of the importance of measured generosity for maintaining social standing, without courting controversy or accusations of self-promotion. Despite the advantages conferred by her marriage, Ida's public life was not without challenges. Benjamin's personal reputation, affected by rumors of gambling and irregular business dealings, required vigilant management. Ida responded by further increasing her control over the household's public image. She minimized opportunities for embarrassment, declined invitations from potentially controversial hosts, and avoided venues associated with political infighting or financial speculation. Newspaper archives and the testimony of family acquaintances demonstrate that her intervention was effective in shielding the family from direct scandal. Throughout this period, Ida's private nature became more pronounced. While she fulfilled her obligations as the wife of a public figure, she rarely sought attention for herself and delegated more public-facing roles to Benjamin. Letters from this era often describe her as a stabilizing presence within the household, and legal documents confirm her growing authority in decisions affecting both social and financial matters. Her insistence on privacy was respected by most of her contemporaries, many of whom noted that she was rarely the subject of rumors or unfavorable comment in social columns. The stability and respectability Ida achieved during these years were not accidental. Her careful management of both household and public life ensured that the family retained its status even as social and economic conditions in New York shifted. The city's elite, increasingly shaped by rapid financial expansion and growing class divisions, offered both opportunities and risks. Ida's conservative approach protected the family from the volatility that affected many of their contemporaries. By the close of the 1880s, Ida's reputation as a prudent and dignified matron was firmly established. She had successfully navigated the expectations of upper-class society and maintained the family's position despite periodic challenges. The social patterns, financial controls, and personal habits established in these years would have a lasting influence on her subsequent choices. This phase of active public life set the stage for the transition to widowhood and the eventual shift toward increasing privacy and financial self-protection that would come to define her later years. The death of Benjamin Wood in 1901 marked a decisive turning point in Ida Wood's life, transferring full legal and financial authority to her at a time when such independence was rare for women of her generation. Probate documents from the early 1900s confirmed that Benjamin's estate was considerable, consisting of real estate holdings, significant cash reserves, shares in the New York Daily News, and a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds. Ida, as the principal beneficiary and sole executor, assumed the responsibility for settling outstanding debts, distributing minor bequests, and preserving the remainder of the estate in accordance with both the law and her late husband's instructions. This new role required a heightened level of engagement with bankers, attorneys, and accountants, whose records from the period reflect frequent and detailed consultations. In the years immediately following Benjamin's death, Ida implemented a series of changes designed to consolidate her control over family finances and insulate her holdings from risk. She converted a portion of her inherited securities into cash, closed several accounts at institutions she deemed unstable, and relocated the majority of her valuables to safe deposit boxes managed exclusively in her name. Ledgers and correspondence from 1902 and 1903 show that she maintained a personal ledger, updating it meticulously with every transaction. She also conducted periodic reviews of her holdings, often meeting with trusted financial advisors, but remaining skeptical of any recommendations involving long-term or speculative investments. Ida's approach to managing the estate reflected her cautious temperament and increasing distrust of external parties. She grew reluctant to delegate decision-making, preferring to handle even minor transactions herself. Household staff noted changes in routine. Ida curtailed large-scale entertaining, reduced the number of regular employees, and shifted the family's daily operations toward greater efficiency and privacy. These adjustments were mirrored by her social schedule, which became progressively limited as she declined most invitations and restricted her circle to only the closest friends and family. Throughout the 1900s, Ida's correspondence with her daughter Emma and her sister Mary indicates a heightened preoccupation with security. Letters discovered in later legal disputes reveal repeated references to the dangers of theft, fraud, and legal entanglements. Ida began to withdraw substantial sums of money from banks, preferring to keep a growing portion of her wealth in cash or easily transportable securities. By 1910, she had moved a significant amount of her liquid assets into personal safes and other secure locations under her exclusive control. During this period, Ida's public profile diminished further. She no longer appeared in society columns or attended charitable events as frequently as she had in previous decades. Family acquaintances reported that she answered few letters and seldom entertained guests at home. The practical effect of these changes was to create an increasingly insular household environment in which all financial and social activity was tightly monitored and external influences minimized. Household accounts from the 1910s reflect a decrease in discretionary spending and an emphasis on routine, predictable expenses. By the second decade of the 20th century, Ida Wood had established herself as a uniquely independent figure among wealthy widows of the Gilded Age. Her meticulous attention to financial detail, skepticism toward outside advisors, and determination to safeguard her inheritance distinguished her from her peers. These traits, reinforced by the habits and routines she developed during widowhood, would shape her subsequent choices and directly influence the extraordinary steps she later took to ensure privacy and security. The new systems and boundaries she put in place after Benjamin's death positioned her for the next phase of her life, a period defined by increasing withdrawal and an uncompromising commitment to self-reliance. In the years following the consolidation of her financial position, Ida Wood began a gradual but unmistakable retreat from public life, a shift first noted by close acquaintances around 1910. Archival hotel records and contemporary witness statements confirmed that by the early 1910s, Ida had taken up residence with her daughter Emma and her sister Mary at the Herald Square Hotel, located at the intersection of Broadway and 34th Street in Manhattan. The move from her previous residence to the hotel marked a definitive step toward greater privacy. Leasing a suite on one of the upper floors, Ida initiated a routine that would soon become both rigid and unyielding, with strict limits imposed on all contact with the outside world. Hotel staff who worked at the Herald Square Hotel during this period later provided sworn testimony describing the Woods' unusual domestic arrangements. They reported that deliveries were received through a small opening, meals were requested by written note, and tips were passed discreetly, always in cash. Cleaning staff were dismissed or only allowed to enter under direct supervision, and maintenance requests were kept to a minimum. It became clear that the Woods sought to minimize all direct human interaction. This was not a temporary measure, but a deliberate long-term strategy. Registers from 1912 to 1915 show that the family rarely left their rooms except for brief, necessary errands. And most communication with hotel management was handled in writing. Ida's growing suspicion of outsiders led to increasingly stringent security measures within the suite itself. The doors were fitted with multiple locks, windows were kept shut, and valuables were stored in a series of personal safes, boxes, and trunks. Inventory lists recovered after Ida's death confirmed that large sums of cash, negotiable bonds, jewelry, and other easily portable valuables were kept on hand at all times. These precautions were matched by a corresponding reduction in household staff, where once she had maintained a full complement of servants, by the 1910s, the number had dwindled to a bare minimum. Correspondence from this era reveals that Ida's social network shrank to a handful of trusted individuals, primarily family members and one or two legal advisors. Even these relationships were often maintained at a distance. Letters sent by friends and distant relatives routinely went unanswered, while invitations to social events were declined with increasing frequency. Emma and Mary, too, became almost entirely dependent on Ida for their social and financial security. The three women developed a routine defined by self-sufficiency and vigilance, with all household duties, correspondence, and financial transactions handled internally. The shift toward seclusion had practical consequences beyond social isolation. Ida began converting an even greater share of her assets to cash, minimizing exposure to the risks she associated with banks and financial institutions. Bank ledgers and withdrawal slips from this period document frequent, large withdrawals, with most funds transferred to her personal custody rather than being reinvested. Statements from legal counsel confirm that she reviewed her will and estate documents repeatedly, but refused to grant outside parties any substantive authority over her affairs. By the late 1910s, the pattern of life established at the Herald Square Hotel was set. All outside interaction was minimized, financial assets were managed with extreme caution, and the daily routine was organized around privacy and security. This level of seclusion was highly unusual for a woman of Ida's means and background. While some acquaintances speculated about the reasons for her withdrawal, all available documentation indicates that her decisions were consistent, methodical, and aligned with her long-standing distrust of outsiders. The retreat into seclusion that began in the 1910s set the foundation for the extraordinary isolation that would come to define the remainder of Ida Wood's life. The systems of security, the boundaries around personal contact, and the insular routines established during these years served both as protection and as the basis for even more rigid isolation in the decades that followed. This chapter marked the transition from a life of guarded engagement to one of near total withdrawal, reshaping the nature of her existence and setting the course for all that came after. The daily life of Ida Wood, her daughter Emma, and her sister Mary inside the Herald Square Hotel suite, beginning in the 1910s, was marked by rigid routines and a pronounced emphasis on privacy. Hotel staff and service personnel, whose testimony and written statements later became part of estate proceedings, described a living arrangement that prioritized security over comfort. The Wood family suite occupied an upper floor, with windows kept covered and all forms of external noise or observation minimized. Housekeeping was almost entirely managed by the women themselves, with Ida taking personal responsibility for the cleaning and maintenance of their rooms, including the disposal of waste and the laundering of clothing. Food, supplies, and mail were requested exclusively via written notes, which were slid under the suite's door. The family paid in cash for all deliveries, tipping generously but avoiding any unnecessary interaction. Records show that grocery orders were strictly utilitarian, consisting of basic staples that could be stored long-term. The frequency and nature of these orders suggested a reluctance to depend on outside vendors or to reveal anything about the family's preferences. Occasionally, trusted staff members recalled brief exchanges with Mary, who was tasked with accepting parcels or asking for minor repairs, but these interactions were always brief and devoid of any personal detail. Ida enforced a series of strict internal rules. No strangers were permitted to enter the suite. Je wirst durchschreien door some bestuurings, and all correspondence was reviewed and screened before any response was given. Visitors were never welcomed inside. On rare occasions when repair work was necessary, workers were supervised at all times and instructed not to linger or explore beyond their assigned task. Testimonies collected from hotel management and maintenance workers during subsequent legal inquiries indicate that these rules were enforced consistently for many years, regardless of changing hotel staff or management. Within the suite, the three women organized their days around repetitive. Ida maintained a personal ledger where she recorded every expense, however minor. Emma and Mary took responsibility for organizing household supplies, inventorying food stores, and helping to preserve valuables. Family letters and estate records found after Ida's death revealed that she stored cash, jewelry, and negotiable securities in unconventional places, inside hat boxes, behind loose panels, and even sewn into clothing. All banking and financial transactions were carried out through Ida, who refused to disclose account details to anyone outside her immediate family. The suite's physical environment gradually reflected the family's long-term isolation. Over the years, clutter accumulated, and the rooms became densely packed with boxes, trunks, and personal effects. Maintenance was limited to the bare minimum required for health and safety. There are no documented complaints from neighbors or other hotel guests, as the Wood suite was notably quiet, and its occupants made little noise. Hotel records indicate that Ida paid rent several months in advance, ensuring there was no cause for the management to interfere. Emma's and Mary's roles were clearly subordinate to Ida's authority, yet both were integral to sustaining the daily routines of the household. The women communicated regularly among themselves, but had little contact with anyone outside. This insularity reinforced their dependence on one another and on the routines Ida imposed. The available evidence from personal papers and testimony shows that the system they built was self-contained, efficient in its way, but deeply isolating. By the early 1920s, the life established in the Herald Square Hotel had become Ida Wood's entire world. The elaborate structure of rules, routines, and safeguards protected her fortune and privacy, but also ensured that genuine engagement with the outside world was nearly impossible. The structure and rhythm of daily life inside the hotel suite served both to reinforce the family's isolation and to enable Ida's ongoing control over all aspects of her existence. This phase set the enduring patterns that would define the family's final decades together. The long period of seclusion in the Herald Square Hotel saw Emma Wood and Mary Mayfield assume roles that were both operational and symbolic within Ida Wood's highly controlled domestic structure. Contemporary accounts, as well as later testimony from hotel staff and legal investigators, reveal that the daily functioning of the suite depended on clear delineation of tasks and strict adherence to Ida's established rules. Emma, Ida's only daughter, and Mary, her unmarried sister, lived entirely under the governance of Ida's protocols, with little autonomy and no independent contact with the outside world. Their responsibilities and routines were both a reflection of Ida's distrust and a mechanism for reinforcing the family's insularity. Emma Wood, whose health had already begun to decline by the time the family entered seclusion in the 1910s, was primarily responsible for maintaining internal order in the suite. She inventoried food and household supplies, managed clothing repairs, and kept a meticulous record of the family's modest requirements. Surviving notebooks discovered among her possessions after her death contain entries cataloging groceries, laundry cycles, and scheduled cleaning tasks, each checked off with the methodical precision expected by her mother. Emma's involvement in household management was a practical necessity, as outside help had long since been dismissed and all cleaning, cooking, and organization was conducted privately. Her gradual withdrawal from physical activity, likely due to ongoing health issues, did not lead to any relaxation of these routines. Instead, as she became less mobile, Mary increasingly assumed her duties. Mary Mayfield, Ida's younger sister, acted as the primary intermediary between the family and the outside world. She was typically the one to slip notes under the door for supplies or repairs, accept packages, and on rare occasions exchange brief words with hotel staff. Statements made by former employees and corroborated by written records describe Mary as polite but cautious, always careful to limit the length and substance of any conversation. Her role was critical to maintaining the daily flow of necessary goods and services, while upholding Ida's strict standards for security and privacy. Within the suite, Mary also took charge of organizing storage spaces, overseeing the safekeeping of valuables, and assisting Emma as her health worsened. The roles played by Emma and Mary were not simply pragmatic. They formed the backbone of a household culture in which all members' identities were subsumed under the imperative of secrecy and control. Letters written by Mary, found only after the suite was opened to authorities in the 1930s, show little mention of friends, personal ambitions, or outside interests. Instead, her correspondence was entirely practical, concerned with repairs, supply deliveries, and financial arrangements as dictated by Ida. Similarly, Emma's writings indicate a daily life shaped by repetition and adherence to procedure, with few references to the world beyond their hotel suite. The nature of these roles produced a dynamic that reinforced Ida's authority while intensifying the family's dependence on one another. No evidence exists of open conflict, but the complete absence of outside relationships suggests a deep and unvarying reliance on family structure for emotional and practical support. As Emma's health deteriorated, Mary assumed more responsibilities, eventually becoming the principal agent for all outside transactions and the de facto caretaker for both her sister and niece. By the late 1920s, the physical and emotional health of both Emma and Mary had declined markedly. Nonetheless, the routines Ida established were maintained without significant change. The rigid division of labor and the unbroken pattern of internal management persisted, further isolating the family. The compartmentalization of roles within the suite became both a means of survival and a barrier to any outside intervention. This chapter of their lives solidified the family's retreat from the world, setting the stage for the final, most isolating years of their existence. As the years passed within the walls of the Herald Square Hotel, Ida Wood's suspicion of outsiders intensified, manifesting in practices that surpassed ordinary caution and verged on compulsive security. Records and sworn accounts from hotel management, as well as statements later collected in legal proceedings, provide a clear chronology of how Ida's concern for safety shaped the daily operations and financial arrangements of her household. Her distrust of banks, legal advisors, and even distant relatives was rooted in long-standing anxieties, but by the late 19-teens, these patterns had become dominant features of her life and those closest to her. The management of the family's wealth shifted almost entirely out of formal institutions. Bank ledgers from the period indicate a series of large cash withdrawals, beginning around 1916, with Ida converting savings, certificates, and negotiable bonds into physical currency and valuables. Hotel staff recalled frequent visits by delivery men and security guards, always conducted with minimal communication and completed with cash payments in sealed envelopes. Witnesses also observed the delivery of trunks and boxes, some of which remained unopened and stored in corners of the suite for years. Ida would not allow even trusted staff to assist with moving or inventorying these items, insisting on handling all arrangements herself, often late at night to avoid observation. Within the suite, Emma and Mary were instructed to help conceal valuables in various containers: hat boxes, false bottom trunks, linen cupboards, and even inside clothing. The family's routine included periodic inspections of these hiding places, with Ida documenting the contents in a handwritten ledger she kept secured at all times. When on rare occasions questions arose regarding missing items or the need for new storage, Ida's response was to increase the frequency of these checks and to further limit access to even the smallest circle of trusted individuals. Statements from Mary's later letters confirm that the suite contained a wide array of items: gold coins, currency, jewelry, and deeds to property, none of which were disclosed to authorities or entered into any official account. Ida's suspicion extended beyond concerns about theft or fraud. By the late 19-teens, she refused to sign any new legal documents without extensive review and, more often than not, rejected the involvement of any attorney who was not previously known to her. Attempts by banks to confirm her address or conduct routine updates on dormant accounts were rebuffed or ignored. There are documented cases in which she returned certified letters unopened, and family acquaintances reported that requests for assistance or meetings were regularly declined. This attitude was reinforced by the absence of any social visits to the suite, and by the complete cessation of correspondence with individuals outside the immediate family. Emma and Mary, increasingly dependent on Ida's routines, adapted to these heightened measures. Their few interactions with hotel staff or delivery personnel became shorter and more formal, and all communication about the family's affairs was routed through Ida. The insularity was so complete that even emergency situations were addressed without summoning external help. Minor repairs, health issues, and legal inquiries were handled privately or simply left unresolved. The cumulative effect of Ida's growing mistrust was to create a closed environment in which all transactions, movements, and relationships were subject to constant review and control. Hotel staff and later investigators noted that while no specific incident seemed to trigger these changes, the intensification of security protocols corresponded with reports of increasing agitation in Ida's demeanor. Her withdrawal from any kind of financial or personal engagement with outside parties marked the final evolution of her self-imposed isolation. By the beginning of the 1920s, Ida Wood's suspicion had hardened into an enduring pattern that dictated not only the family's living conditions, but also the management of its fortune. The habits and routines developed during these years would leave a complex legacy, both complicating future legal efforts and defining the last stage of Ida's extraordinary retreat from the world. Emma Wood's health began a steady and visible decline during the later years of the 1920s, a development well documented in both personal correspondence and witness statements from hotel staff. While her early years in seclusion had been marked by active participation in the household's routines, Emma's ability to contribute to daily tasks diminished as a combination of chronic illness and prolonged isolation took its toll. Notebooks and ledgers recovered from the suite reveal increasingly frequent gaps in Emma's handwriting, with Mary Mayfield gradually assuming responsibility for many of Emma's former duties. Family letters from this time, though rare, point to a growing preoccupation with Emma's well-being and the adjustments necessary to maintain the household structure as her health worsened. By the middle of the 1920s, Emma suffered recurrent episodes of weakness and persistent fatigue. The precise nature of her illness is difficult to determine, as Ida Wood consistently refused all offers of medical assistance. Testimonies from hotel management and several staff members confirmed that inquiries regarding Emma's health were either rebuffed or answered with vague assurances that outside intervention was unnecessary. Ida's suspicion of outsiders, by then deeply entrenched, extended to physicians and pharmacists. On several occasions, the family ordered simple remedies, aspirin, tonics, and hot water bottles, from local shops, but no doctor was ever permitted to examine Emma. Requests for more comprehensive care were met with immediate refusal. Mary Mayfield's role as caregiver intensified during this period. She was responsible for preparing meals suited to Emma's increasingly limited appetite and for ensuring that the suite remained quiet and orderly. Financial records show a notable shift in spending, with less money devoted to ordinary groceries and more spent on easily prepared or preserved foods. There are also indications, drawn from both purchase logs and the testimony of a trusted delivery man, that the family acquired blankets, heating pads, and other items designed to increase Emma's comfort as her physical strength waned. Ida Wood's handling of the situation remained consistent with her established patterns. All transactions related to Emma's care were conducted in cash and kept private, and no additional staff were hired to assist, despite clear evidence that both Mary and Ida were struggling to meet Emma's needs as her mobility declined. Ida's written notes from this period, discovered after her death, reflect a preoccupation with order and security, but contain little discussion of Emma's medical situation beyond recording the purchase of supplies. As Emma's condition continued to deteriorate into the late 1920s, she became largely confined to bed. Mary's daily responsibilities expanded further, encompassing nearly all tasks related to Emma's personal care. The isolation that had once been a choice was now an inescapable condition for all three women, as Emma's frailty left her unable to participate in even the most routine household activities. The physical toll of this arrangement was apparent in Mary as well, who began to exhibit signs of exhaustion and stress. Emma Wood died in the suite in 1928, her passing noted only by the family and recorded quietly by hotel management. No public notice was given, and no funeral was held. The loss was handled internally, consistent with the family's long-standing approach to privacy and control. Emma's death deepened Ida's resolve to maintain the strict boundaries that had defined their lives for nearly 2 decades, and it placed additional burdens on Mary, who became Ida's sole remaining companion and assistant. The consequences of Emma's declining health were significant. Her death marked the end of the family's already fragile equilibrium and led to further withdrawal, both socially and practically. The routines that had once supported a household of 3 now became the structure for 2, intensifying the isolation and foreshadowing the challenges that would follow in the final years of Ida and Mary's shared seclusion. The period following Emma Wood's death in 1928 marked a profound deepening of seclusion and rigidity within the suite at the Herald Square Hotel. With only Ida Wood and Mary Mayfield remaining, all elements of household life contracted even further, and the patterns that had governed their existence for nearly 2 decades became still more entrenched. Testimony from hotel staff, later submitted as part of probate proceedings, indicated that sightings of Ida and Mary became exceedingly rare. Most deliveries and requests were communicated exclusively by brief written notes, while in-person interactions were almost entirely eliminated. Ida, by then in her late 80s, relied on Mary for the execution of all essential tasks, including the procurement of food, payment of rent, and handling of supplies. During these years, the suite itself evolved into an enclave of extreme privacy and protection. Ida implemented a system of multiple locks on the doors and further restricted access to the rooms, even for hotel management in situations involving maintenance or safety checks. Reports from housekeeping and maintenance supervisors reveal that requests for entry were met with written refusals, and when access could not be avoided, the women closely supervised every action, refusing to leave staff alone in any part of the suite. The physical environment deteriorated as a result. Piles of old newspapers, boxes filled with personal papers, and unused supplies accumulated in corners. Evidence collected after Ida's death included receipts and purchase logs that documented repeated acquisitions of basic goods, food staples, toiletries, and cleaning products, stockpiled against the possibility of unforeseen shortages or interruptions. Financial activity during this time became more sporadic, but no less secretive. Ida continued to conduct all transactions in cash, and Mary was tasked with exchanging bills or coins for smaller denominations when required. Large sums of currency and negotiable instruments remained hidden throughout the suite, a practice Ida maintained in accordance with her ongoing mistrust of banks and legal representatives. Any legal correspondence received by the women was typically ignored or returned, and the family ceased responding to letters from distant relatives, former acquaintances, or even legal counsel. These refusals were documented in the correspondence files of several attorneys who had represented Ida in previous decades. The daily rhythm of life for Ida and Mary was built around routines of self-sufficiency and constant vigilance. Meals were prepared using non-perishable items, and efforts were made to conserve supplies and minimize the need for new purchases. Written notes between Ida and Mary, later found among personal effects, show meticulous planning of menus, cleaning schedules, and the rotation of hidden cash reserves. Neither woman left the suite except under the most pressing circumstances, and neither allowed any outside influence to disrupt their routines. As Ida's health began to decline in the late 1920s and early 1930s, Mary became the sole support for her elderly sister. Despite increasing frailty and evident difficulty managing daily tasks, Mary continued to fulfill the role of caretaker, errand runner, and gatekeeper for the suite. Observers noted the toll this took on Mary's own health, as her physical appearance grew more worn and her movements slower over time. Yet neither woman ever requested outside assistance, and no attempt was made to secure medical care beyond what could be obtained through over-the-counter remedies delivered by trusted suppliers. The last years of isolation, culminating between 1928 and 1931, were marked by absolute withdrawal from the world outside the Herald Square Hotel. By the end of this period, even the limited contact the family had previously maintained with select staff and former associates was effectively ended. The system of routines, boundaries, and internal controls that Ida had established over many years became the only framework sustaining daily life. This stage of extreme isolation set the stage for the eventual intervention by hotel authorities, when the realities of age, illness, and mounting practical needs finally overcame the formidable barriers that Ida Wood had constructed around her existence. By the early 1930s, the extreme isolation of Ida Wood and Mary Mayfield had become a source of mounting concern for the staff and management at the Herald Square Hotel. Records from this period indicate that hotel personnel began to notice significant changes in the routine of the 11th floor suite. Requests for food and supplies became less frequent. Payments were sometimes delayed, and the already minimal face-to-face interaction ceased altogether. Staff statements later submitted in legal proceedings described a growing unease about the well-being of the suite's occupants, particularly given their advanced ages and the visible signs of physical decline during the rare occasions either was glimpsed outside their rooms. Repeated attempts by hotel management to verify the welfare of Ida and Mary were consistently rebuffed. Requests to enter the suite for cleaning, maintenance, or safety inspections were met with firm written refusals, often accompanied by cash payments to discourage further inquiries. Several notes preserved in the hotel's administrative files reveal Ida's insistence on privacy and her unwillingness to discuss any matters related to health or outside assistance. Despite these barriers, the staff maintained a record of all interactions and began to monitor the situation more closely as evidence of neglect and potential risk accumulated. The situation reached a crisis point in early 1931 when the frequency of requests for food dropped precipitously and payments for rent and services lapsed for the first time. The hotel manager, acting on both legal advice and moral responsibility, contacted local authorities to request an official welfare check. On the designated day, a small team of police officers, accompanied by building representatives, arrived at the suite. After repeated knocks went unanswered and written requests were ignored, the decision was made to forcibly enter the rooms. According to official police reports and detailed statements from witnesses, the sight that greeted them inside was one of advanced neglect and near-complete physical deterioration. Ida Wood and Mary Mayfield were found in frail condition, surrounded by years of accumulated possessions, stacks of cash, negotiable securities, jewelry, and countless personal effects. The suite itself bore the marks of long-term confinement, curtains drawn tight, boxes blocking passages, and little evidence of recent cleaning. Despite her weakened state, Ida initially resisted attempts to provide medical assistance and refused to answer questions about her condition or that of her sister. It was only under sustained pressure from authorities and the immediate intervention of medical professionals that she permitted the most basic care and allowed Mary to be examined. The hotel staff, now tasked with assisting the authorities, began the process of cataloging the contents of the suite and ensuring that both women received food and medical attention. The initial inventory revealed extraordinary sums of cash in various denominations, as well as a trove of jewelry, documents, and other valuables stored in unconventional locations throughout the rooms. The findings immediately attracted public and press interest, as word spread of the reclusive millionaire and her hidden fortune. The intervention of authorities in 1931 brought the long era of absolute seclusion to an abrupt end. Ida and Mary were both transferred under supervision for ongoing care and further evaluation. The hotel suite, once a bastion of secrecy, was now the subject of investigation and public scrutiny. This episode marked the beginning of a new phase for Ida Wood, one in which the concealed realities of her private world would be methodically revealed and examined by others for the first time in decades. The discovery of Ida Wood's and Mary Mayfield's living conditions and the vast sums of cash and valuables within the Herald Square Hotel suite in 1931 produced immediate and widespread media attention. News of the forced entry, the state of the suite, and the wealth hidden there circulated rapidly among reporters covering Manhattan's courts and police precincts. Within days, the story was featured on the front pages of major New York newspapers, accompanied by sensational headlines describing Ida as the millionaire recluse and speculating about the origins of her fortune. The convergence of age, secrecy, wealth, and eccentricity proved compelling to the public, and correspondents from both local and national publications sought access to every available detail. Articles published in the first weeks after the intervention were grounded in police statements, hotel management accounts, and interviews with staff who had interacted, however briefly, with the Wood family over the years. Reporters described the suite's cramped, dimly lit interiors, the boxes and trunks stacked nearly to the ceiling, and the bundles of currency found in unlikely containers. The coverage dwelled on the contrast between the immense wealth discovered and the frugal, even austere manner in which Ida and her companions had lived. Journalists emphasized that despite possessing a fortune, the family had avoided all outward display, with their clothing, meals, and furnishings reflecting the habits of a far more modest household. As the story spread, speculation about Ida's past intensified. Journalists attempted to reconstruct her early life, marriage to Benjamin Wood, and the gradual path to seclusion. Some outlets referenced earlier appearances in society columns, while others focused on the dramatic transformation from public figure to recluse. Several articles sought expert commentary on the psychological effects of isolation and the possible motivations for such extreme withdrawal. Letters to the editor, published in several major papers, reflected both sympathy for Ida's circumstances and curiosity about her reasons for distrusting banks, legal advisors, and outsiders. The public interest in Ida Wood's story prompted legal authorities to issue official statements clarifying the facts of the case. Probate officials confirmed the inventory of assets, and the police released details of their initial welfare check. The New York Surrogates Court, responsible for overseeing the disposition of Ida's estate, received numerous inquiries from potential heirs, amateur genealogists, and members of the general public who claimed some connection to the family. The volume of correspondence and requests for information was such that court staff created standardized responses to manage the influx. Press coverage of the Wood case was not limited to New York. Newspapers across the United States and in several European cities ran features on the Hotel Hermit, amplifying both the factual and speculative elements of the story. Editorials reflected on broader themes, such as the loneliness of wealth, the risks of excessive privacy, and the consequences of mistrust in an increasingly interconnected society. Ida's life and death were recast as symbols of the perils that could accompany the pursuit and preservation of fortune. The sustained media attention shaped public perception of Ida Wood's legacy. She became, in the span of weeks, a figure alternately pitied, criticized, and mythologized. The circumstances of her discovery were discussed in the context of changing norms around mental health, women's autonomy, and financial stewardship. For historians and journalists alike, the Wood case became a reference point in debates about Gilded Age wealth, the burdens of secrecy, and the hidden stories that sometimes underlie public reputations. This phase of coverage ensured that the events at the Herald Square Hotel would remain a topic of public interest well into the ensuing legal battles over her estate. The unmasking of Ida Wood's extraordinary fortune and the circumstances of her seclusion at the Herald Square Hotel immediately triggered a complex and highly public series of legal disputes over her estate. Upon confirmation of her death, the New York Surrogates Court opened formal probate proceedings, recognizing the need to establish the legitimacy of any and all claims to the wealth discovered in her hotel suite. Court dockets from 1931 and 1932 reflect a rapid influx of petitions from relatives, legal representatives, and others asserting a right to inherit. Many of these claims were accompanied by affidavits, letters, and family records, some dating back to the early years of Ida's life as Ellen Walsh in Massachusetts. The process of validating claimants was hampered by the absence of a clear, up-to-date will. Although records indicated that Ida had prepared testamentary documents during earlier decades, her increasing mistrust of legal advisors meant that she had never executed a final version or updated existing drafts to reflect her changed circumstances. As a result, the court was tasked with reconstructing her family tree and determining next of kin, a task that involved reviewing birth records, marriage certificates, and immigration documents from the mid-19th century onward. Attorneys appointed by the court interviewed distant relatives, analyzed old correspondence, and consulted the personal papers of both Ida and her late husband, Benjamin Wood. Competing claims to the estate quickly gave rise to adversarial proceedings. Several would-be heirs disputed the legitimacy of others, raising questions about the authenticity of documents and the accuracy of family histories. Court transcripts from this period contain detailed testimonies from genealogists and handwriting experts, as well as depositions from individuals who had interacted with Ida during her years of isolation. The complexity of the case was further compounded by the decentralized and undocumented nature of much of the fortune. Large sums of cash, bearer bonds, and valuable jewelry for which there was no formal accounting. Investigators were required to assemble a comprehensive inventory, cross-reference recovered assets with bank records and safe deposit logs, and verify the provenance of jewelry and negotiable instruments. Amid the legal wrangling, the New York Surrogates Court sought to maintain control of the estate and ensure the security of the assets. Administrators sealed the hotel suite, transferred valuable items to secure facilities, and required regular accounting from the lawyers charged with managing the probate process. Meanwhile, the court also received inquiries from charitable organizations and creditors, some of whom argued that Ida Wood's estate was subject to outstanding obligations or implied bequests based on her previous philanthropic involvement. The probate process extended over several years, drawing ongoing media attention and prompting commentary on the legal and ethical challenges inherent in administering the assets of individuals who had lived for decades outside the scrutiny of public institutions. Judges, administrators, and legal counsel found themselves at the center of a case that touched on evolving questions of inheritance law, mental competence, and the preservation of property rights across generations. Ultimately, the disposition of Ida Wood's estate depended on the careful validation of kinship, the authentication of documents, and the neutral management of her substantial fortune. The legal disputes not only delayed the distribution of wealth, but also served to highlight the lasting impact of Ida's choices on those who remained, reinforcing the narrative of secrecy, complexity, and controversy that had come to define her legacy in the public record. Following the intervention at the Herald Square Hotel and the opening of probate proceedings, court-appointed administrators and legal representatives initiated a detailed process to inventory and recover the substantial assets left behind by Ida Wood. The initial examination of the suite, as recorded in contemporaneous police reports and sworn statements from hotel staff, revealed a scene of remarkable disarray, but also one of immense value. Personal effects, household goods, and clothing were piled alongside containers stuffed with cash, gold coins, negotiable bonds, and an assortment of jewelry. The complexity of the asset recovery operation was evident from the outset, as each drawer, trunk, and box could contain anything from decades-old correspondence to stacks of currency in various denominations. Inventory teams worked systematically, cataloging items and producing itemized lists that would serve as the official record for legal proceedings. Police officers and estate administrators jointly supervised the collection and counting of cash, ensuring that each bill was accounted for and all jewelry was logged, photographed, and secured. Gold and silver coins, discovered in purses and beneath floorboards, were weighed and transferred to court-managed safekeeping. Among the more unusual finds were envelopes of cash sewn into the linings of dresses, stacks of currency hidden in old shoes, and jewelry wrapped in handkerchiefs at the bottoms of steamer trunks. In addition to tangible valuables, investigators uncovered financial documents, stock certificates, deeds to property, and ledgers detailing transactions conducted entirely outside the banking system. These records offered partial insight into the history of the Wood fortune and the methods Ida had employed to conceal, manage, and protect her wealth. While some documents related to legitimate business activities and property holdings, many simply confirmed her habitual withdrawal of assets from banks and her deep reluctance to entrust others with her affairs. Not all assets could be fully traced or matched to official accounts, reflecting the extent of Ida's efforts to keep her fortune private. The process of asset recovery was not without challenge. Several items required forensic analysis or expert appraisal to determine authenticity and value, particularly with jewelry and negotiable instruments. Attorneys managing the estate arranged for appraisers, jewelers, and financial experts to conduct evaluations and produce sworn statements for submission to the probate court. The unusual storage of items and the absence of standard documentation meant that administrators were compelled to exercise caution and rigor at every step, as the possibility of contested ownership or missing assets remained a concern. The asset recovery operation extended over several months, with periodic updates filed to the court and presented during probate hearings. Every significant discovery prompted additional legal review, particularly when new claimants emerged or when items with unclear provenance were located. The court took measures to safeguard the integrity of the estate, securing valuables in bank vaults, issuing receipts for each item transferred, and instructing all parties to maintain detailed records of chain of custody. By the end of the process, administrators had compiled an exhaustive inventory, including hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, a wide array of fine jewelry, gold and silver coins, and securities with substantial face value. The results of this work confirmed both the magnitude of Ida Wood's fortune and the extraordinary lengths she had taken to safeguard it. The official recovery of assets not only facilitated the next steps in the probate process, but also brought public and legal clarity to the practical consequences of her years of isolation and secrecy. The records created during this phase would become essential reference points for the final distribution of her estate and the resolution of ongoing legal disputes. Following the forced entry and Rainier into the Herald Square Hotel suite and the transfer of Ida Wood and Mary Mayfield into supervised care, a comprehensive evaluation of their medical and psychological condition was undertaken. Reports filed by attending physicians, nurses, and social workers in 1931 provide a factual account of Ida's state after decades of voluntary seclusion. She was admitted to a New York hospital under the authority of local officials, and her initial examination revealed severe physical frailty, malnutrition, and marked signs of neglect. Weight, blood pressure, and laboratory results confirmed the toll that years of isolation and self-imposed deprivation had taken on her body. Physicians described Ida as alert and coherent in matters relating to her finances, but evasive or resistant when questioned about her living arrangements and reasons for prolonged seclusion. Nursing staff noted her insistence on privacy and minimal contact, even in a medical setting. Ida responded to most inquiries with brief factual statements and declined to discuss her family history or personal affairs in any detail. Medical notes from the period indicate that she was capable of making her own decisions, but that her ability to cooperate with standard care procedures was limited by her long-standing habits of control and mistrust. Psychological assessments, conducted at the request of the probate court, focused on determining both Ida's mental competence and the potential impact of extended isolation. Psychiatric evaluations observed no acute psychosis, but identified features consistent with long-standing paranoia, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, and social withdrawal. Ida displayed an exaggerated concern for security, refusing to allow personal effects out of sight and expressing persistent worry over the disposition of her valuables. Her affect was described as flat, her tone even, and her willingness to engage with doctors or social workers strictly circumscribed by her own priorities. Mary Mayfield, although younger than Ida, exhibited similar patterns of withdrawal and stress-related symptoms. Examination records document malnutrition, exhaustion, and evidence of emotional strain. Mary's accounts of their daily life corroborated the picture of a closed, tightly regulated environment in which routines were dictated by Ida and all external contact was minimized. She reported few independent interests or relationships outside the immediate family and struggled to adapt to the increased presence of caregivers and legal authorities following the intervention. Medical teams prescribed nutritional support, basic nursing care, and monitoring for both women. But the prospects for recovery were limited by age, chronic conditions, and their mutual dependence on established routines. Ida, in particular, refused many recommended interventions and insisted that decisions about her treatment be made in accordance with her own understanding of what was necessary and safe. Legal representatives appointed by the court ensured that all procedures complied with the requirements for capacity and consent, and regular updates on the women's condition were submitted to the surrogate's court as part of the ongoing estate proceedings. The documentation generated during these assessments became an important part of the historical and legal record. They provided a factual basis for decisions about guardianship, the administration of remaining assets, and the eventual disposition of Ida Wood's estate. The findings also contributed to broader debates in medical and legal circles about the effects of isolation, the boundaries of personal autonomy, and the responsibilities of institutions to intervene in cases of self-imposed seclusion among the elderly and wealthy. By the end of 1931, Ida Wood remained under observation. Her health stabilized, but her prospects for significant improvement limited. The assessments confirmed that the years of reclusion had imposed lasting physical and psychological consequences. The careful and impartial documentation of her condition ensured that future decisions would be grounded in evidence rather than speculation. As the legal and medical complexities of her case continued to unfold, Ida Wood's final months were spent under medical supervision, with her declining health carefully documented by the hospital staff and legal guardians assigned by the surrogate's court. She remained lucid in her communication regarding her financial affairs but participated as little as possible in discussions about her daily care or the circumstances that led to her hospitalization, Physicians' notes from early 1932 describe Ida as physically weakened by age, years of malnutrition, and chronic ailments that had gone untreated during her decades of seclusion. Despite the interventions provided after her removal from the Herald Square Hotel, her overall prognosis was poor. As Ida's physical condition deteriorated further in late winter, medical staff coordinated closely with the court-appointed administrators to ensure that all legal and procedural requirements were observed. Ida refused most visitors and insisted on minimal disturbance, accepting only the most essential nursing care. In the weeks before her death, records indicate that she remained preoccupied with the security of her possessions and with inquiries about the management of her estate. She provided instructions to her legal representatives, requested written confirmation of the disposition of personal effects, and asked that all documentation related to her finances be kept in strict order. Ida Wood died in early March of 1932, just 5 days after reaching her 94th birthday. The official cause of death, listed on hospital records and the death certificate, was a combination of advanced age, malnutrition, and complications of chronic illness. Upon her death, the court's appointed estate administrators assumed responsibility for final arrangements, as no close family remained to make decisions or claim her body. The hospital notified the surrogate's court and local authorities, who immediately authorized the transfer of her remains to a funeral director. Her burial was conducted without public ceremony or significant attendance. Ida was interred at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, in a modest plot selected by the estate administrators. There were no formal eulogies, no published obituary, and no surviving relatives in attendance. The costs associated with her funeral, as with all other personal expenses following her removal from the hotel, were paid directly from her estate under court supervision. The details of her burial were recorded in the administrative files kept by both the funeral home and the court, becoming part of the official record for probate purposes. Ida Wood's passing was widely reported in the press, but the coverage focused almost exclusively on the circumstances of her seclusion, the legal battles over her estate, and the inventory of her fortune. Public reaction reflected a mix of fascination, sympathy, and criticism, with editorials drawing attention to the paradox of immense wealth coexisting with a life of profound isolation. Professional observers, including physicians, legal scholars, and social workers, cited her case in debates about mental health, autonomy, and the obligations of families and institutions to intervene in situations of extreme withdrawal. The conclusion of Ida's life in March of 1932 marked the end of an extraordinary personal history. Her burial, conducted quietly and without ceremony, was consistent with the pattern of privacy and self-sufficiency that had defined her final decades. The legal and administrative processes set in motion by her death continued for years afterward, as the courts worked to resolve the final disposition of her estate and to reconcile the remarkable facts of her secluded life with the interests of potential heirs and the public record. The aftermath of Ida Wood's death in March of 1932 initiated an extended phase of legal administration and social analysis, as the surrogate's court and appointed estate administrators undertook the complex work of resolving her affairs. The court maintained jurisdiction over the estate for several years, managing claims, reviewing appeals, and overseeing the final distribution of the considerable fortune that had been hidden for so long within the walls of the Herald Square Hotel. The detailed inventories, appraisals, and forensic accounting produced during this period reflected both the magnitude of Ida's assets and the difficulties involved in authenticating ownership and identifying legitimate heirs. Legal challenges emerged almost immediately. Distant relatives previously unknown to Ida and long separated from her by both geography and family history submitted affidavits and genealogical evidence in support of their petitions. The surrogate's court was required to adjudicate competing claims, some of which involved elaborate family trees and contested lines of descent dating back to the early 19th century. Attorneys acting for the estate presented historical documentation, scrutinized birth and marriage records, and retained experts in handwriting and document analysis to verify the authenticity of correspondence and testamentary materials. The process, which extended well into the late 1930s, set a precedent for the management of estates left by individuals who had lived in near total isolation and maintained no current will. In parallel with the legal proceedings, the case of Ida Wood became a subject of professional and popular commentary. Journalists, legal scholars, and physicians cited her story as a cautionary example in discussions of inheritance law, wealth management, and the social responsibilities of both families and institutions. Editorials published in legal journals and newspapers alike explored questions about the obligations of banks, hotels, and social service agencies to intervene when evidence of withdrawal and vulnerability became apparent. The Wood estate, its unusual structure, and the circumstances of its concealment prompted calls for reforms to ensure more regular welfare checks and reporting for elderly and wealthy individuals living in seclusion. Professional associations, including the New York Bar Association and medical societies, referenced the Wood case in debates about the legal and medical assessment of mental competence. Her ability to manage complex finances while refusing all outside contact presented unique challenges to existing frameworks for determining capacity and the need for guardianship. Subsequent legislative proposals were informed by these discussions, emphasizing clearer guidelines for the monitoring of at-risk individuals and more proactive engagement by public authorities. The social impact of Ida Wood's life and estate reverberated beyond the courtroom and professional circles. Her story was frequently cited in books and articles examining the psychology of wealth, the risks associated with extreme privacy, and the intersection of mental health and personal autonomy. The details of her retreat from society, her distrust of legal and financial institutions, and her commitment to secrecy were treated as both an anomaly and a warning for the increasingly urban and interconnected population of the United States in the early 20th century. By the close of the decade, the estate had been largely settled, with distributions made to the court-approved heirs and residual assets allocated to pay outstanding obligations and legal costs. The conclusion of the legal proceedings did not diminish the continuing relevance of Ida Wood's experience. Instead, it contributed to evolving standards in estate management, guardianship, and the broader field of social welfare, marking her legacy as one of both caution and instruction for future generations of legal and social professionals. The case of Ida Wood, culminating in her death in March of 1932, and the subsequent legal and public scrutiny, left a legacy that extended far beyond the resolution of her estate. Historians, legal analysts, and journalists repeatedly returned to the story in the decades that followed, finding in her life a unique convergence of Gilded Age wealth, social isolation, and the practical consequences of unchecked mistrust. The comprehensive documentation generated during the inventory of her assets, the administration of her estate, and the investigation into her long seclusion provided a detailed record for future researchers. These primary sources, court transcripts, inventories, personal papers, and medical records, enabled a forensic examination of the ways in which personal history, financial caution, and social withdrawal shaped not only her fate, but also broader public understanding of the period. Ida Wood's choices regarding privacy and security became a reference point in discussions about the management of great wealth, the limitations of legal oversight, and the psychological toll of sustained isolation. Scholars examining the social landscape of the late 19th and early 20th centuries identified her case as an outlier that nonetheless revealed important trends: the difficulties faced by women in controlling their own fortunes, the risks inherent in eschewing institutional support, and the vulnerabilities experienced by individuals who, whether by inclination or circumstance, became detached from social and legal networks. Academic works published in the years after her death drew parallels between Ida's life and those of other prominent figures who withdrew from public view, using her example to illustrate the changing dynamics of gender, property, and autonomy. Legal professionals and policymakers also referenced the Wood estate as a touchstone in reform efforts aimed at improving guardianship standards and estate administration. The protracted probate proceedings, complicated by the absence of clear documentation and the existence of distant, often untraceable heirs, prompted calls for more rigorous requirements around the drafting of wills and for regular welfare assessments for elderly individuals living in isolation. Court decisions and legislative debates cited the challenges of the Wood case as justification for procedural updates in both New York and other jurisdictions, shaping policy long after the final distributions had been made. In popular culture, Ida's story retained a measure of fascination, resurfacing in books, radio segments, and magazine features that explored the boundaries between wealth and happiness, privacy and loneliness, and security and vulnerability. Her life was presented as both cautionary tale and historical curiosity, emblematic of an era in which fortune could be both an asset and a burden. Through the careful preservation of the records generated by her case, Ida Wood's legacy became a subject of continuing inquiry and instruction. Her experience informed debates about the responsibilities of family, legal institutions, and society in responding to self-imposed isolation and the management of inherited wealth. The lessons drawn from her life, rooted in documented fact and chronicled in exhaustive detail, continue to resonate, underscoring the complexities of personal autonomy, financial stewardship, and social connection in modern history. The story of Ida Wood is a rare and instructive episode from the Gilded Age, revealing how the pressures and opportunities of great wealth can lead to a life of fear and solitude. Her 24 years of seclusion ended with the discovery of a hidden fortune, legal battles, and ongoing public interest, serving as a reminder that the burdens of trust, inheritance, and privacy are as real as the assets themselves. Today, her case stands as a lesson in the limits of financial security and the personal costs of isolation, continuing to inform debates about the management of wealth and the responsibilities of society to those who withdraw from its view.